I turned his Vile Intrusion into a primary ability by pairing it with Thorns. Combined with stacking Culling Strike Threshold through items like Horror's Flight, this support ability becomes an unstoppable force in maps. Thorns whittles enemies down until his Vile Intrusion teleports in and swiftly finishes the job with cascades of violent abyssal explosions. And taking a look at the abilities, we start off with Spear Stab, our default attack. This is only used for exploit weakness. This allows us to consume broken armor on a boss, which then allows us to break their armor once again to make sure our scavenged plating stays stacked. We take Encase in Jade because there's no other good nodes for us to use in the Warbringer, so we use this just as an extra defensive ability, which gives us some damage reduction and guard. Supported with Prolonged Duration, Physical Mastery, Rapid Casting, and Efficiency. Feast and Flesh is from our Unborn Lich staff. This is used as a corpse consumption to give us large amounts of life and mana regen. Use this periodically while going through maps and you will stay relatively healthy. I support this with Gorge, Magnified Area 2, Corpse Conservation, and Rapid Casting 2. Now we get to the meat and the bones of the build, his Vile Intrusion. This is our main ability, again being granted to us by the Unborn Lich staff. This ability is so freaking cool. This ability acts as a teleport onto a monster within the cull threshold, instantly calls it, and creates a green physical damaging nova in the area. Additionally, you can impale targets with his Vile Intrusion, meaning you essentially mark them, and once their health gets below that cull threshold, you will automatically teleport onto the target and they will be culled. So you can stack up multiple culls in once with this method. And now using our spirit, we pick up Explosive Transmutation. This is just a nice boost in damage when you're mapping, since whenever you pick up a remnant, they explode, causing damage. I'm using mana remnants as well as Kalguran remnants, so this contributes to our mapping damage nicely. I support it with Magnified Area, Efficiency 2, Spell Cascade, Blind for a bit of utility, and Physical Mastery for another plus level. Of course, mana remnants help support the Explosive Transmutation while just giving us some mana, and I am using Mind over Matter, so being able to replenish our mana essentially replenishes our health. Support this with Remnant Potency 1, Harmonic Remnants, and I have a Thorn Skin 1 in here since, yes, we are dealing Thorns damage. And very importantly with Thorns is Scavenged Plating. This is an extremely powerful spirit node. This cranks up our Thorn damage a ton, as well as giving us a bunch of armor, increasing our defenses. Remnants of Kalgor gives us a source of ward regen, as well as another source of damage with Explosive Transmutation. Of course, support this with Remnant Potency 1 and Harmonic Remnants 2. And with whatever leftover spirit I had, I slapped in a Time of Need for a little bit of a heal and a curse cleanse. And lastly, we have Rapid Assault being used in our secondary weapon set. This is primarily used as our boss killer and the occasional tough rare monster that isn't dying from the Thorns and the Cull. To take advantage of our Thorns damage on our gear, we support Rapid Assault with Barbs 2. This makes it so our next 6 hits retaliate with our Thorns damage, and we have quite a bit of it, so this damage adds up nicely. And of course, Rapid Assault itself also hits 6 times, so it's a really nice support gem in this ability. In addition to that, we have Quill Burst. This is an AoE retaliation which also deals our Thorns damage. We also support it with Uruk's Smelting, so we can break more armor and increase our physical damage on a target even further. I use Life Tap, so we're spending life instead of mana because I'm using Mind over Matter. Sometimes my mana will be at 0, but I still want to be able to use Rapid Assault. And lastly, I'm using Rapid Attacks 3 for 35 increased attack speed, and specifically Rapid Attacks 3 because I don't actually care about the damage of the spear itself, since all of the damage is coming from our Thorns through Barbs and Quill Burst. Now, looking at the gear, of course, the Unborn Lich is the star of the show with his Vile Intrusion as our main ability. As for the desecrated modifiers you can get on the staff, there's a handful of great ones. I ended up going with increased spell physical damage. Of course, that's mandatory with his Vile Intrusion, since we're dealing physical damage. I also grabbed a chance to inflict bleeding. Now, I'm not focused on bleeding in this build, but we are dealing physical damage, so we are getting some value out of it at least. I also grabbed the Spirit node as well as Block Chance, and because we're on the Warbringer, having Block Chance on this staff, we're quite easily able to hit maximum block. For my gloves, I'm using Horror's Flight. Now, this item is mandatory when it comes to his Vile Intrusion because we gain 1 stack of Fear Incarnate when we cull a target. When we cull a target, we get 10% increased Culling Strike threshold up to 20 stacks. stacks, meaning this pair of gloves, when fully stacked, we have an additional 200% culling strike threshold, and this just helps his Vile Intrusion really just snowball and cascade all throughout the maps. And these gloves do have the Raven Touched modifier that allows us to add an Anoint to them, in which I've added Bounty Hunter. This gives us life and mana recovery, as well as 25% culling strike threshold, which works nicely with Vile Intrusion. And of course, because I am implementing Thorns into this build, Crown of the Pale King essentially becomes mandatory. This item makes it so Thorns can retaliate against all hits, meaning any source of damage, we are then reflecting our Thorns damage. And similarly, the Briar Patch unique boots are extremely powerful when it comes to Thorns, since it gives us a 25% base crit chance to Thorns. This makes it relatively easy to get our Thorns critical hit chance to 100%. I'm using a plate belt for armor and as many resistances as possible, as well as Thorns damage, since this is one of the few slots that can roll Thorns damage inherently. On my chest, I'm looking for as much armor and as many defensive modifiers as possible. Of course, importantly, we also have our Thorns damage here, but this is just a big piece to get your defenses as high as you can. For my jewelry, I'm using a pearl ring with a ton of cast speed. This is a really nice quality of life when it comes to his Vile Intrusion. I would recommend getting as much cast speed as possible. As for other important modifiers, well, here you just want to fill your resistances as much as you can. I am duplicating my pearl ring with the Calandra's Touch. However, if you find on your build you're missing certain stats, definitely use a second ring to do so. As for my amulet, I stole this from my previous Chronomancer, but this thing is just insane. I kind of had to use it again. It's got 50 spirit, some spell damage, skills, a bunch of cast speed, and all res, just generally good stats that you can pretty much use on any spellcasting build. I do have this anointed with Cull the Hordes. This gives us an additional 40% culling strike threshold against rare or unique enemies. On my weapon swap, I'm using a sea glass spear with attack speed and gain extra physical damage given to me by the perfect essence of abrasion. Now, you might look at this weapon and think, Troy, what the heck is this? There's only 2 modifiers. Yep, that's right. I'm only using a 2 mod spear. You know what? Style points does have value, but realistically, there aren't very many mods that actually help with Thorns with our exact setup. You could get a nice triple flat damage prefix, of course, to bring the damage of the spear itself up, but I'm getting so much damage from Quill Burst and Barbs too anyways, it feels negligible. As for the suffixes, things like critical hit chance, critical damage bonus, unfortunately don't actually apply to our Thorns damage because it is local to the spear. So you would be surprised when I say this is nearly a best in slot item for this build. And of course I socket this with gain % extra damage, since that helps greatly with our Thorns. And on my shield, of course, I have another source of Thorns damage, but importantly, just a large chunk of armor and other defensive modifiers. I found stun threshold to be quite helpful on this build. If anything, I would like to get a little bit more, but you know what? Any defensive modifiers here, of course, helps. And now quickly to look at some important augment sockets in the gear. The Greater Rune of Tithing gives us 1 to 100 Lightning Thorns damage, and this contributes nicely to our overall damage. Grab as many of these as possible. Another very important rune synergizing with Thorns is the Emergent Instinct Ancient rune. This makes it so Thorns damage is lucky against targets with fully broken armor. And since we're dealing massive spell AoE damage with his Vile Intrusion, almost every target will have broken armor, including bosses. So this makes it so our Thorns will just roll again and deal the higher result. Otherwise, I use a handful of defensive nodes such as Reduce Curse Effect and Reduce Critical Damage Bonus, and I have a little bit of Area of Effect in my helmet. Of course, on our weapons, you want to grab as much gain as extra damage as possible, since this does contribute to our Thorns damage very nicely. And looking into the passive tree, in our Ascendancy, we grab Anvil's Weight to make it so we break armor equal to 10% of hit damage. This means all of our damage breaks armor. This node is terrific with Thorns and keeping our scavenged plating up all the time during maps. I take Turtle Charm to increase the maximum block chance from 50% up to 75%, and with my last 2 points, of course, I grab Encase and Jade, simply because there aren't really any other good options here for us. To go through the rest of the tree, we move western to grab some block chance, Thorns crit, global crit, and damage, move south to grab more Thorns damage nodes, and even more block chance. Just to the west of this, I have my go-to time loss setup of this season. You've seen this in the past few builds, build, but it is very powerful. When you have a time loss jewel with whatever desired stats you might have, and when you pair it with the From Nothing diamond that allows you to allocate around the radius of blood magic, well, you can get a lot of very nice nodes and a ton of stats for relatively cheap. Within this radius, I pick up 7 notables, not all of which are crucial for the build, but it does help power our time loss jewel by giving us a bunch of area of effect, critical damage bonus, and critical hit chance for spells, which does help his Vile Intrusion. And just below, we have a nice Thorns cluster for block chance and Thorns. We pick up all of these here. Moving north, we pick up some physical damage and some critical hit chance nodes on the way. We travel all the way up to Mind Over Matter. Since his Vile Intrusion doesn't cost any mana, our mana pool is effectively not being used. This just makes it so our unused mana gives us another buffer of health. Continuing along the edge, grabbing plenty of attributes and jewel sockets, a little bit of intelligence if needed, and coming to the end for even more critical hit chance nodes, making our Thorns 100% chance to crit. And quickly looking at the weapon set points on set 1 with my Unborn Lich staff, I focus on area of effect and spell casting speed. As for the spear swap, I ended up picking up a handful of the Thorns damage nodes. As for the jewels, we have a From Nothing diamond, which lets us allocate nodes within the radius of blood magic. This is paired with the time loss jewel we have here on the western side of the tree. This gives a tremendous amount of stats. I have a few rare jewels which have area of effect, Thorns damage, and a little bit of armor. This Megalomaniac diamond gives us Hunting Companion, which gives us even more Culling Strike threshold, as well as Lay Siege, which increases our damage based on our block chance. And on the Warbringer, this is a fantastic node. And my last unique jewel is a Heart of the Well with even more Culling Strike threshold, a little bit of damage as extra, and some critical damage bonus. Checking out the stats, you can see my elemental resistances are nearly full, with the Chaos Res sitting at 68%. Could min-max this a little bit better, but you know what? It does pretty good. When I'm on my staff swap, the armor sits at 6200 with a 74% block chance, just shy of maximum 75%. When I swap, you can see the armor cranks up to 9500. We lose a little bit of block chance, but the Thorns damage does jump up. And while in combat, you can see when our Scavenge plating is at a full 10 stacks, our Thorns damage sits around 20,000 on the high end, which is a fair amount. Of course, that's on the spear swap. When we're on our Vile Intrusion staff, we're still hitting about 10,000 Thorns damage, so a surprisingly high amount of Thorns. And of course, at 10 stacks of Scavenge plating, we also get increased armor, bringing the total to about 16,000. Alrighty guys, let's jump into some gameplay here. We're going to be running some T16s with 3 Breach tablets. Let me tell you, this build absolutely loves Breach and does pretty good in Abyss. Really anything with a lot of mobs, it just absolutely obliterates. But let me know what you thought about this build. Is this something you would ever try? How would you improve it? And guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Atta Troy!